Well, good evening and a very warm welcome on behalf of Milim to this evening in the company of the actress, playwright and author Vanessa Rosenthal. Welcome to our wonderful live audience here at the UHC in Leeds, and welcome to those of you watching at home all around the UK and indeed all around the world. My name is Jonathan Straight and I'll be chatting to Vanessa, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. Your questions are welcome. For those of you at home, please type whatever you would like to ask into the Q&A facility on your screen. And as ever, we will try to get through as many of your questions as we can. Again, for those watching at home, can I also draw your attention to the chat facility? This can be used to send a message to all of the other online participants, should you wish to do so. Finally, this event is being recorded and will appear on the Milim website at milim.org.uk in the next few days. There you can find recordings of past events, as well as details of our future programme for which you can book tickets. And so to our guest this evening. As I said earlier, Vanessa Rosenthal is an actress, a playwright, and now an author, born in Manchester and trained at the Central School of Drama in London. She has acted in theatres all around the country, as well as on radio and television. Vanessa has also written extensively for the BBC and for theatre. Her book, Inside Out, A Life in Stages, is published this coming Thursday in both hardback and Kindle editions. Vanessa, you're a long-time supporter and contributor to Milim. Indeed. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here this evening. Welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Now, your book is out this week, and I think by way of introduction, we should start with a short extract. So if you'd like to read us a little bit of the book, we are in your hands.
Thank you. I'd just like to say before I start that the book is really about a number of things. It's about my life as an actor and a writer, about my life in Leeds, about the university, and running through it all is a quest or a question. And I think when I read this first section, you will probably have an idea what that is. It's not quite at the beginning of the book, but it's near the beginning. On the first night of Passover, we celebrate with a family Seder at my Auntie Bessie's and my Uncle Adolph's house. Bessie, full name Rebecca, is my father's first cousin, and he's elder by 20 years. She is the only cousin of that generation to be born in Bialystok, then in Russia, now in Poland. Her parents, Samuel and Leah, left her as a 6-month-old baby with Leah's widowed mother when they migrated to Britain around 1884. Once they were established in Manchester in a small drapery business, Leah's mother was to come over, bringing the baby with her, a task she duly accomplished with every intention of remaining. But after a year, her misery at the sight of the blackened cityscape of 19th century Manchester drove her back home. She left behind her, as well as the baby, her younger daughter, Jane. Now the tale takes on a familiar Jewish twist. In due course, Samuel invited his younger brother Eliezer to join him from Russia, and lo and behold, Eliezer met Jane and there was a shidduch. When Jane and Eliezer married at the Great Synagogue in Manchester, family ties were then doubly cemented. Bessie's children and my father's children, Judith and myself, thus share the same 4 great-grandparents. This should make us doubly cemented. It doesn't. By the time of this Seder in 1950, none of these great-grandparents or grandparents are alive. Grandmother Jane was alive at the time of my parents' wedding and shunned the whole event as a sign of the tragedy she felt had befallen her son, my father Leonard, in marrying out. This sense of being not acceptable is one I have already absorbed in a process of osmosis. If my mother isn't and wasn't acceptable, then maybe I'm not either. I don't know anything yet about words like identity crisis, but I will recognize it intellectually as I grow up and trail it behind me as I go on in life. So here we are, Uncle Adolph at the top of the table, Bessie at the bottom with her 2 sons, Leslie and Harry, together with their wives and their 2 children apiece, arranged along the sides of the table. Our family is down near the bottom, near Bessie, a woman of character and intelligence, and one of the few people here who genuinely and warmly accepts my mother. We like Bessie, although her appearance startles us a little. Now in her mid-60s, her hair is dyed jet black and pulled tight to sit in a bun at the top of her head. Her complexion is parchment white from the layers of powder that sit on her cheeks, and her mouth is permanently turned down. Judith and I think it is because of the misery she must endure married to Uncle Adolf, a narrow-minded, bigoted man with eyes only for his progeny and their children. Leslie and Harry are nearer my father in age, although it is Bessie who is my father's first cousin. The 20 years between Bessie and my father sets all the generations in a jumble. Leslie, like my father, is a GP and is married to the glacial Florence, who is a rabbi's daughter, and Harry is married to the blonde Irene. We begin. I love the sound of the men racing each other as they davern their way through the Passover story. My father amongst them. Here he is a real mensch. But if at Passover we retell the story of the exodus of the children of Israel from their enslavement in Egypt into the promised land of Israel, Adolf has long ago decided that the promise doesn't hold good for Judith and me, for his concentration is directed exclusively towards his 4 grandchildren. This is a pity, because for once Miss Myers can't be faulted on how well she has prepared me to understand the meaning of the Seder. I am thrilled by the story. I understand the symbolic foods we eat to remind us of our servitude and then of our deliverance. I enjoy splashing my finger in the Passover wine 1 drop at a time to remind us of the 10 plagues God visited upon Pharaoh to convince him to let us go. I like the chroset made of walnuts, cinnamon, and minced apple that we eat on a piece of matzah to symbolize the cement we used to make bricks for Pharaoh's palace. Especially, I love the hard-boiled egg in salt water we eat to remind us of the tears we have shed and of the promise of renewal that is to come. But it's a long evening before we can start on the chicken soup, the roast chicken, and the dried fruit salad with macaroons. Near the end of it all, we 6 children have to find the afikoman, the piece of matzah hidden behind Uncle Adolf's cushions. We will be rewarded with a bar of chocolate that is kosher for Passover, or at least Adolf's grandchildren will be rewarded and wrapped in kisses and hugs until Auntie Bessie pulls a long face and says our names out loud. Adolf, Judith, and Vanessa. Every year he pretends to forget us, although Bessie always buys 6 bars. We don't like Adolf.
Thank you very much. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your parents and particularly this sense of not being acceptable that you mention.
Yes, I mean, I think really a lot of it is there in that account, which is why I chose it. I think as a small child, the perceptions that you have are very acute and they stay with you. And my father's family certainly had a patronizing and a condescending relationship, saw very little of them from the moment really of my parents' marriage. My parents were from very, very different backgrounds. My father was the 2nd British-born son of Eliezer, who I've just mentioned, and brought up in Manchester, and funnily enough, in Wrexham, which is where they had another branch of the drapery shop. And they had a very, very small shul in Wrexham, which I was astonished to find that they did, 64 people. And Eliezer was president of the small synagogue in Wrexham. That was my father's background. They moved from Wrexham when he got a scholarship to Manchester Grammar and a scholarship eventually to Manchester Medical School. My mother was from Lancashire farming background, going back generations, very patriotic, very proud of being Lancastrian. Distant relation was of John Bright, and they were farming really around places like Bury and Rawtenstall and Rochdale. She came to Manchester to complete her training as an elocution teacher at the Northern School of Music, and appeared from time to time in small parts in Russian repertory theatre, which in those days did take students. So it was professional theatre, Russian repertory. So the worlds were very different.
Did that have any impact on your decision to be an actress? Was that your motivation? And I wonder how your family reacted to you deciding you wanted to be an actress.
Well, against that background, of course, from my mother, I was taken to the theatre very frequently, very much read to as a small child, my sister and myself. So theatre was in the house, in the sort of culture of the home. I think that my decision that I wanted to be an actress had something to do with that, and something to do with what I've already talked about here, of struggling to find my identity, struggling to feel I really belonged in the Jewish community, of which I was totally brought up in Reform Judaism in Manchester. But these nuances were hanging around. How did they accept me going into the theatre? My father's reaction was, I must have a teaching qualification as well. I was bound to fail, and then what would I do?
But you go off anyway. You go
Yes.
to London. It's the 1960s.
Yes.
How was London in the 1960s, and particularly how was it to move from Manchester?
I think London was a great shock to me in the 1960s, which I did my very best to not show. The big thing to show was that you were cool and that it didn't shock you. So I arrived there in 62. By about 63, 64, it was really taking off. Carnaby Street, all of that, and the music. It was a huge culture shock. I think the kind of hours that one kept at a drama school, as opposed to university where there was much more free time, it was more like a school experience. Is that you got there at 9 in the morning and that was your day till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So there wasn't all that much time to sort of be let loose and sample it all, and I'd have been too frightened to sample much of it anyway.
But you obviously go back to Manchester in the holidays.
Oh, yes.
How was that sort of following on from the excitement of
Well, of course, it was the other way round then.
Right.
I was Miss Cool, and Manchester was just like, oh, well, I mean, I'm now... in fact, I used to say this awful thing. I said it on the night I met my husband, Jim, at a New Year's Eve party, and when somebody asked me if I was from Manchester, I said, and I am ashamed to actually voice it now, I said, well, actually, I don't know. You see, I'm a drama student in London and I live in Hampstead, and I can hear myself saying it now. So I thought Manchester, no, London was wonderful then.
Your parents, for a 21st birthday present, gifted you a trip to Israel
Yes,
to work on
yes.
a kibbutz. How was that?
Oh, it was a wonderful experience. It is true, gifted in the sense of it gave me the money, but the whole push for it came from me. It was me that wanted. It was in advance of my 21st, and so I had to say, please, can I have it in an early birthday present, the passage to Israel. So it was Machanaim in the Upper Galilee, and it was a wonderful experience.
And in terms of your sense of identity you were looking for,
I certainly
did it
identified.
help you?
Yeah, it did and it didn't. It certainly helped me feel a whole part of that community and feel, which I had never doubted. It was other people that doubted it for me. My sense of myself as a Jew was something I never doubted. It was the doubt of other people and what that did to me. So there on the kibbutz, I felt totally at home. What I felt alien about, because of course I was near the end of my training as an actor, was how do you survive as a creative person on a kibbutz? This is all about community, about the group as a whole. And the idea of expressing yourself individually didn't really seem to accord with the kibbutz.
Now, you finished drama school. I imagine then, as now, many actors are out of work. Did you find work? What happened when you qualified?
I found work before I qualified. I actually started at Farnham, which was my first job, 3 or 4 weeks before the end officially of my graduation, and had to get permission to leave early.
Now, you've kindly offered to share
Yes.
one of your early acting experiences with us. So again, over to you.
If I am, yes. So my first job was a 40-week contract at the Castle Theatre in Farnham, playing fortnightly rep as a provisional equity member. I was there as actor and assistant stage manager, which meant as general dog's body, I scoured the antique shops in town on alternate Mondays, begging for the loan of an aspidistra pot or a Regency side table for our upcoming show. On alternate Saturdays, we worked through the night to strike one set and put up another. Over the 40 weeks, I gained confidence as an actor through my mistakes, some more spectacular than others. One of my most memorable was in yet again another Agatha Christie, staple fare for reps in the 60s and 70s because the audiences loved them. This time it was Murder at the Vicarage, and I was playing another maid, again called Mary. During the strike on the previous Saturday night, I was consigned to packing a tea chest with props from the last show. It was gone midnight, and I was very tired after a matinee and an evening show. I rubbed my eyes, and my contact lenses flew out. These were the hard sort of lenses, each the size of a small pea. I shouted out that everyone must come and help me go through the tea chest meticulously from the bottom up. But they were all tired too, and my request was met with a kind of hysterical laughter. No, I just have to do without them. All right for them, but without my lenses, I was blind as a bat. I had no spares and no spectacles, all part of a kind of carelessness that was very much a part of me then, and probably to a lesser degree still is. I managed to cope with good luck rather than proper judgment at the dress rehearsal. My astigmatism, combined with my short sight, meant that seeing anything in the darkness backstage was a real challenge for me. On the first night, I saw the green cue light come on for my entrance and frantically tried to make out where the door was for me to get onto the stage. Oh, hurrah! I could see a chink of light. I groped towards it, pushed hard at the stage flat in front of me, and moved forward, with difficulty, it must be said, because the ground underneath me was uneven and the door seemed to have shrunk. Cynthia Grenville and Norman Jones, as the Reverend and Mrs. Clement, gawped in astonishment over their breakfast table as I appeared bursting through the baronial fireplace. For seconds, none of us spoke. I turned in shock and looked at the pieces of red and stage gels I'd trampled through, carefully arranged to catch stage lighting and suggest a live fire. My arrival was nothing short of a religious miracle. I trod burning coals to reach them. Would I ever live it down?
Fantastic.
And all true.
Now, Jim, who you met at that New Year's party,
Yes.
You and Jim decide to get married. How did your family react to that?
Well, obviously with sadness, with disappointment. I think it was felt much more keenly in many ways by my mother than by my father, who had committed herself so completely from the moment of her conversion before the Beth Din. I think that she had hoped that she had done a full job, and somehow my announcement that I was going to marry Jim was a sign of failure to her. My father, who was a highly intelligent, thoughtful man, was greatly disappointed, but this was history almost repeating itself. And my assurance that my sense of my Jewish identity was who I was, in some ways, was a reassurance. There was never any suggestion of not being there for my simple registry office wedding. There was some distance in the beginning, but by the time the children arrived, my father in particular was extremely fond of Jim.
Now, part of that relationship resulted in you moving to Leeds.
We moved to Leeds.
And again, you've got some words to share with us
have.
about your thoughts on our fair city, so please.
We moved to Leeds when Jim, who had been working when I met him, he was from a northeast, again like my mother, a northeast Lancashire cotton village with a first-class English honours degree from Leeds University, working in administration at Manchester University when I met him. And we moved to Leeds in 1971 when Jim was appointed Deputy Registrar of the University and later became Registrar of Leeds University. So here we are. My first impressions of Leeds back then were not favourable. Leeds looked like a one-horse town, defeated by the collapse of the textile industry, and yet to diversify, as it did a decade later, into financial services and light engineering. At my first university dinner, I overheard an elderly, very patrician woman say in a loud voice, "I really don't like Leeds at all, awful city, but what I do like is that one can get out of it so easily into glorious North Yorkshire." That might have been the occasion, or a later one, when the professor of dentistry's wife, who was Norwegian, lamented the passing of standards within the university in a doleful sing-song voice. "When I came to this university," she told me, "all the ladies wore white gloves up to their elbows if the Princess Royal, our Chancellor, was visiting. We lined up on the Parkinson steps and curtsied low as her car drew up."
Fantastic.
And really, I do cover an awful lot in my book about university life, in particular Jim's very close working with the then Vice-Chancellor Edward Boyle, who they did become personal friends as well as working colleagues, and Jim was with Edward Boyle along with Fanny Waterman right on the day that he died, and very, 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 very saddened, as the whole university was by the loss of such a man. However, this is at a point before we get to that sadness. The high point of the university calendar was the honorary degree ceremony held each May. A committee had been considering names for some months, and there was always a degree of interest in the local press as the day came nearer. More memorable than others was 1980. That year, the list included Tom Stoppard, to my delight, and Shirley Williams, to Jim's delight. The day was full of ceremonial and speeches, preceded by lunch, and afterwards by a formal dinner for over 100 in full evening dress. In the euphoria of all this, Justin Grossman, a senior reader in the sociology department and a New York Jew, bounded up just as things were breaking up and suggested we extend the night by going on to good friends of his in Headingley, whom he knew Tom Stoppard would just love to meet. In fact, he'd already waylaid Stoppard, and even now they were making their way to Justin's car. All we had to do was to follow in ours. Jim had likewise waylaid his heroine, Shirley Williams, and had offered her a lift back to the university guest house. "Brilliant! Bring her too," Justin said. "She'll love it." At near midnight, a group of us found ourselves outside a Georgian terrace house set in darkness in Headingley, with Jim still talking 19 to the dozen to Shirley Williams. In fact, he'd not stopped from the moment he'd handed her into the front passenger seat of our car and indicated to me to get in the back. without bothering to introduce me. When the conversation somehow drifted on to the subject of nuclear weapons, something prompted Shirley Williams to say, well, I can tell you this, if there was a nuclear war, the last person I'd like next to me in the trench would be an intellectual. At this point, Jim suddenly remembered me and said, oh, I don't think you've met my wife, Vanessa, and threw an arm up in the direction of the back seat. By the time we arrived on the Headingley doorstep, I was put out and spoiling for a fight when we got home. Justin, meanwhile, was hammering away at the front door. Eventually, lights went on, and a hugely pregnant young woman opened the door in a dressing gown. Clearly, we weren't expected, but unfazed, Justin took over. Hi! We've all come from an honorary degree dinner and thought we'd drop by. Shirley Williams and Tom Stoppard are with us and a whole bunch of other folk, he said. Then turning back to us all, everyone, this is Holly. She's a floor manager at YTV and works with Miriam Stoppard on that program Where There's Life. A hastily dressed husband, Charlie, had appeared behind Holly and welcomed us in. Poor Holly shook hands with each of us as we crossed the threshold and congratulated each of us in turn on our honorary doctorate. In the sitting room, Charlie did his best to produce wine, coffee, tea. Tom Stoppard was obviously very bored. He separated himself from the social faux pas taking place around him and took up a stance against the Georgian fireplace, expecting to be lionized. I wasn't the only one who perceived this as a snub at the house, the evening, and maybe the whole university. Shirley Williams, who was a charming woman, took over, delightfully covering the silences with enthusiastic compliments about the house, the furnishing, and the forthcoming event. Grateful to be rescued, Justin went into overdrive. And Holly paints, he said. Really, she's a great artist. Show us some of your paintings, Holly. When Holly demurred, not once but twice, Justin went to the cupboard under the stairs and dragged out some large canvases and propped them up against the wall with their backs towards us. Everyone except Stoppard drifted across to look as he began to turn them the right way round. The first was a nude, the second a larger nude, the third, fourth, and fifth more graphic nudes. No one knew what to say until Shirley Williams, ever the diplomat, came in with, very nice, she said. Tell me, do you always paint figuratively? What Tom Stoppard thought, he kept to himself.
Well, thank you. And I think it's worth mentioning to our audience that there are many, many, many such tales in the book which are really really worth looking into further and reading. Now, you've got two young daughters
Yes.
by this point, but you're still working as an actress.
Yes.
And I wondered how you managed to balance the two. How do you manage to have a successful career as an actress, which presumably involves a lot of time away, crazy hours, and yet manage to bring up your daughters at the same time?
Well, it's quite a complex answer. I suppose the first thing that I start with is Jim's complete understanding, and Jim's completely saying that I had the right to my career just as much as he had a right to his, which was unusual for my generation then. The second thing was I had a marvelous childminder, and the third thing is until the girls were, I think, was it 11 and 13, I never worked away from home, which meant that all the real onus was on me. So I was working at places like Contact Theatre in Manchester, the Library Theatre in Manchester, York Theatre Royal, Sheffield Crucible. I got as far as Newcastle, Scarborough Theatre in the Round. And from all those places, no, Scarborough was the first when I went into digs, I was commuting and driving home after the show each night. And the other thing is that you forget any contract in the theatre, and I was very lucky, I think actors of my generation were lucky. So a job lasts 8 or 9 weeks, and then you are supposedly, if you use the phrase, out of work. And that is just time you're just at home being mum like anybody else. And increasingly as the years went on, I was doing quite a lot of radio work out of BBC Manchester, and that was, you will work for the day, you were home in the evening, and odd bits of telly at YTV in Granada. So it worked, but it did require an awful lot of organisation. And when I look back, I don't know how I did it sometimes, sort of ironing school shirts at midnight and shopping in supermarkets in towns I didn't know. But if you're determined, yes.
Now, interesting you mentioned the crucible, because
Yes.
you talk about that in the book, and you talk about it being a stage with a wide apron.
Yes.
And you also mention theatre in the round.
Yes.
How does your technique as an actor need to adapt when you've got a different shape of stage,
Yes.
a different kind of
Yes.
stage?
Well, I first of all use this phrase, which I do explain in the book, that theatre in the round, and then I'll come on to the crucible. Theatre in the round, you have 4 tunnel-like entrances coming into the round, which those of you who have been to the theatre in Scarborough will know, which are called the voms. This is literally from the Roman amphitheatre, the vomitoriums. And so you're coming in through the audience, and as you come in, they're sitting here. There's this great sense of immediacy about theatre in the round, which gives an excitement to the actor, and I hope and think to the audience. When you first work in theatre in the round, I think you are absolutely obsessed with, am I turning my back on somebody? Because of all your training has been proscenium performance, and the audience is there and your back is here, apart from the moments you do turn up stage. And you learn, a careful director has plotted it, and you think of the Royal Exchange Theatre in Manchester. Occasionally there is an actor with their back to you during half a scene, but it's directed in such a way that the argument that you are focusing, or that one hopes you in the audience are focusing on, is over there, and that is really seen by nearly over 2/3 of the audience. I think it's the initial sort of nervousness you have, and once you're over that, it is the very great freedom, and that freedom even to turn your back and not be worried about it. But the advantage is that great sense of immediacy.
Interesting. Now, your father's family, as you said at the beginning, were from Eastern Europe, and it's a place which you say fascinated and repelled you in equal measure. You visited there,
yes.
And I'm interested how it felt to be there, how it changed over the years between your various visits, and whether that helped you discover anything you didn't know about your family, and particularly, how did this impact on your quest for identity? Did it help you at all?
Yes, it did. Really, that's quite a number of points there, and trying to answer them in turn. The very first time I went to Eastern Europe, to Poland, it was to represent the university, or Jim to represent the university, at an honorary degree ceremony to commemorate the setting up of Łódź Technica University in 1985, 40-year anniversary, and I found that extremely difficult in all kinds of ways, to be in Poland celebrating something that was being marked from 1945 to 1985. It was the 1945. I felt extremely uncomfortable and odd that here we were, and I was actually, as all the women or the ladies who were there were given a kind of medal, a medallion to celebrate the fact that they were there. I felt very uneasy with that as a Jew. Obviously I did. My feelings about the country that I was able to see then were grey, and this feeling that people were so repressed and so frightened. And at the celebrations afterwards, and I do mention this in the book, and I will share this little anecdote, There was a reception given by the British Council, which I think you might remember, Jonathan, in the book, and all the Polish academic wives were there in their finery, as much as it was, and there was all this whispering and squeaking going on, and I asked this British Council wife what they were squeaking and carrying on about, and she said they have heard a rumour that there are some iced cakes being served with the coffee, and this was such a treat that all this decorum sort of fell away while they were trying to push them into evening bags. And whilst it was very funny, it was also very, very sad. So that was my first impression of Eastern Europe, which was a mixture of horror in a way, being there, being asked to sit there and be nice and celebrate, and how repressed everything was, combined with me thinking, well, why am I here for the first time doing this when this is where my grandparents came from in another part of the country? I have to come back on another occasion. I didn't go back until I think it was 2000, by which time I'd done quite a lot of research into my father's family, and I did go to Bialystok then. And it was, I suppose the word to use, it was coming on. I mean, we were sort of so many years since the fall of the Berlin Wall. I suppose the most upsetting thing was this enormous, absolutely enormous Jewish population had shrunk. There were now 11 Jews living in Bialystok. And that was very much my memorial visit with a guide who was a journalist and had made himself something of an authority on Jewish sites within the city. So it was a difficult but a very important visit.
Thank you. Now, you've spoken a lot about your success and career as an actress, but what made you want to start writing?
That's a funny question to me. I have never not written.
Okay.
You don't start, I don't think, writing. So, I mean, I have always written.
Publish your writing then, perhaps?
Yes. I think I'd always tried. I'd always written, kept diaries, full diaries, poems, bits of prose, started writing novels, and after several attempts, a novel of mine was the runner-up for a very prestigious prize for first-time novelists. And I was talking about this to an actress friend when I was working at the BBC, and it was overheard by the director. And she said to me, I didn't know you wrote, Vanessa. And I said, really? And I meant it. I said, oh, yes, but I write novels, I don't write plays. And she said, well, absolute nonsense, you're an actor, go away and write me a play. And I think it's maybe that the timing was right, because it coincided with the period of deep grief after my mother's death. I had previously already lost my father, and something about that freed me to be able to say things that I didn't feel I could say whilst my mother was alive. And that first play, I went home and did what she said. I went home and wrote a play, and it was called Jerusalem Northwest, and it was about my parents and about their marriage. And it was like writing that first play, just released something, and from then on, I wrote really quite consistently over many years for the BBC.
And these were theatrical plays?
Well, they were broadcast plays.
Okay.
They were broadcast plays, every slot from Saturday afternoon theatre, or Woman's Hour when it would be in those quarter of an hour segments. Yes.
Now, we've spoken about your father's family and
Yes.
trying to trace those roots in Poland. Did you look into your mother's family as well?
Yes, I did. Not in any great depth until much, much later. The decision of my parents had been very much, my mother was an only child, and I think what made life hard for her was by the time she was 28, 29, both her parents had died. So she was very much standing alone with my father's family, really very distant. And a decision had been made by them that really, it wasn't that there was any kind of a great distance, but a distance was kept from her family. She kept in touch with them, saw them occasionally. I can remember visits to some of her aunts and uncles, but it was never regular because the decision was to bring my sister and myself up within a single Jewish culture. And so my mother did not talk in much detail, other than anecdotally, things would slip out about this, that, and the other, but it was never joined up. And after she had died, I again got in touch with one of her cousins, in fact, a first cousin, who I had never ever met, and he was a man by then in his late 60s, and he was a retired chartered accountant living outside Bolton, and I got in touch with him in good Lancastrian way. We were invited for tea, Jim and myself. He said, "What do you want?" I mean, all these years, nobody hadn't been in touch. "What do you want?" And I said, I just want to know about my mother's family. And so I did start to piece a lot of it together and got really quite obsessed with genealogy and all the rest of it.
And did any of this inspire your creative work?
Yes,
your writing?
yes, yeah. Yes. I mean, I wrote a play particularly. I mean, a lot of it came out in bits of my writing. I wrote a play particularly about a great-great-grandfather's generation. There was a family farm called Cantclough Farm, which is actually on the Ordnance Survey map. It's still there, Cantclough Farm, which is not far from Burnley. But the farm is now under a reservoir, which is called Cantclough Reservoir. But that was the basis, walking up to Cantclough Reservoir was the basis of a play.
Now in 2008, Jim, your husband, your partner of more than 40 years, passes away, and you explain the impact, as one would imagine, as absolutely devastating. Yet it's writing that seems to lift you and get you back on track again. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. At the time that Jim died, I had already, with a director I worked with at the BBC, we had put forward an idea that the BBC were very, very doubtful about. We'd pitched the idea. It was a combination of both of us, of a record of the 20th century to be told, a history really, through the diaries, letters and memoirs of ordinary people, called Writing the Century. And in fact, the first episode had already gone out in the December before Jim died, and he did hear that one. When Jim died, I was under contract then to produce another 4 weeks of Woman's Hour, which was a huge amount even for any writer, even without that in their life. Sorry, 3 weeks, I'd already had 1 week I'd done. And I think, and I mentioned this in the memoir, if I had put my hand up and said, I really can't cope with this now, I'm sure they would have been understanding. And I somehow recognized that having to do the task was going to help me, because it allowed me in a way to completely hibernate for 3 months. And there was my grieving and my loneliness, and I was able to say to people, which was right for me, no, I don't need to see anybody. I don't need to go out. Thank you for your kind invitation. I just have to get on with this. And it was kind of a very sealed off experience that helped me through the worst part of the grief.
Now tell us something about writing a memoir. How does this compare to writing a play? And having completed this book, has it helped you to resolve any of these issues of identity that appear to have followed you throughout your life this far?
Well, first of all, how it differs completely from writing a play is there's only one person in this memoir, and that's me. When I'm writing a play, there are several people, there are several different people's voices, and in order for it to be drama at all, at some point they've got to clash. When there's only me, I mean, I can clash with myself, but so that is the biggest thing. I think I never set out, first of all. I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to write a memoir. I'm going to write a book. I started writing, I wrote maybe the first chapter for myself. And then I added a bit more and a bit more. I thought, this is going somewhere. And then I started to structure it. So I didn't set out that my solution to the pandemic was to write a memoir. It just a bit like Topsy, it grew and grew. Has it helped? Yes, it has helped. It's helped because, and I think as Baroness Rabbi Julia Neuberger said, who did see an advanced proof copy, that it is incredibly honest and very truthful. And I think finding the courage to write that truth and to be honest about the dilemmas and to ask me if I've solved things. I think not, but I think I've come to terms with them, and they are my problems, and I certainly do not think and would not wish to suggest that the progeny of every mixed marriage carry around this kind of baggage. Over the years, I've seen many, many rabbis, and probably the best one was the Israeli rabbi who said to me, I think you just think too much, and you probably need a psychiatrist, not a rabbi. So, no, it hasn't, but it's made me more at peace with it. I am who I am. I'm very much an involved member of Sinai, very much a participant, and that's who I am into 2021.
Well, thank you. Now, let's see if our audience have any questions. If you at home have a question, please put it in the Q&A in the next few moments, and Vanessa, I hope will answer you with the same ruthless honesty as the rest of her memoir. Do we have any questions from our audience here? Carol, just hang on 1 second so we can all hear you.
Have you ever acted in one of the plays that you've written, or wish you had got the part?
I wish I got lots of parts, Carol. No, yes, I have. A play that was very close to me called Karen's Way. What was the rest of its title? How ridiculous it's because Karen's Way, a kinder transport life. And I had been occupied with the thought of Karen Gershon for many years, ever since I first read her poetry, published in the 1980s, published by Faber, at one point talked about in the same breath as Seamus Heaney. She was on one of the first kinder transports, about 38, and she wrote really all her poetry is about what that did to her, leaving Germany and trying to find a kind of peace. So there are about 3 books, and they're all on the same subject. And she wrote 2 books of autobiography. So it's in the first person. I went, I did, I saw. And I could see immediately that this would make a play. And I thought of a one-woman show. But that didn't really feel right to me. And it took quite a time. And then I came across the fact that in 1990, I think it was, Television West, the one in the Cornwall down there, had taken her back to Bielefeld, where she came from, and made a documentary about her. And it suddenly went click. And I thought, it's not on. Is it on? And I suddenly thought, this is an idea for a play. And the play now, as it was and as it was done, it went to the Edinburgh Festival and then it went to Israel. I'm playing the older Karen, and she is in my play, wandering through a park in Bielefeld the night before the documentary is made, and out of the shadows comes her 15-year-old self dressed in the uniform of a German schoolgirl with white socks on, and the play is about the two of them, because the older Karen is thrilled to see younger Karen, and younger Karen hasn't gone through the disasters. And the play is with live music provided by Marion Raper and David Riley, who were just superb. And we took it to Edinburgh, and then we were invited to take it to Israel. So yes, it's a bit of a long answer, but it was very close to me, that play.
We have a question from Jay Prosser, who is online. He said, did Vanessa's mother convert? Indeed she did. We've had some problems with the internet, and apologies for that. If those of you at home did miss anything, there will be a recording online very soon. But he's asking about Jews of patrilineal descent, such as yourself, and do you think that there's greater recognition of this within our communities now? Are the divisions between inside and out being gradually eroded?
I don't think I'm the best person to answer that. I don't think I have enough of a knowledge of widely throughout. I suppose I sort of slightly take a reaction to the word patrilineal Jews, because that is suggesting, once again, that my mother's full conversion before the Bet Din was not in any way, from that point onwards, certainly in Reform Judaism, she is a Jew. So to say to me that my descent is only patrilineal is in a way taking me back to some of the things that I find difficult.
Apologies if
No,
difficult words.
But I mean, no apology at all is necessary, but these are the kind of things I think I am raising and trying to do it honestly by giving you that honest answer.
Well, thank you for that. Do we have any more questions from our audience here?
Hello. First of all, thanks for the talk, yes, and the readings. What I was wondering was, I'm thinking back to your plays, and you've discussed one or two of them. I gather they tend to have, so certainly the ones you discussed, have personal derivations, perhaps biographical, perhaps historical.
Yeah.
Is there any common theme linking your plays, or how indeed do you come to decide what subject you want to write about, or is it maybe a particular person, or what's the spark in a sense?
That's a very, very good question. I do think I've answered that in the memoir, and it wasn't, that was writing the memoir did make me suddenly aware that most of the people that I'm drawn to are outsiders, looking in. Certainly Karen Gershon, certainly the one that I took only a couple of years ago around to art galleries, Nina Hamnet, the artist who was disowned by her family. I think that is a theme there that I immediately have an empathetic connection to. Some of them not so, but they have got a biographical, a kernel of something biographical. But then I wrote one called Bottle Blonde and Beautiful, which is about a very run-down hairdressers, sort of beyond Weatherby, where I don't think that they would even know what modern hairstyle is, and it had nothing to do with me. It just, actually, I think I overheard some conversation in the hairdressers that sparked it. Thank you.
Any more for any more? Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for being our guest this evening. It's been fascinating to speak to you and to hear your entertaining and sometimes very moving stories. I can heartily recommend this book. I've been privileged to be able to read it shortly before its publication, so go out on Thursday. In fact, don't go out, go to the Milim website and click the link on there. Milim will earn a few pennies, but the book won't cost you any more, so that is a win-win. And to say thank you, Vanessa, here's a book of some of my photography.
Oh, how lovely.
This is
Thank
the
you, Jonathan.
Israeli Ambulance Service in action, so I hope you'll enjoy
wonderful.
it.
Thank you so much. I don't know if everybody can see this and the camera can see it. What a wonderful thing. That's lovely.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan.
It's a signed copy, so it's not as rare as some of the ones I haven't signed. Anyway, let me just share our future programme with our audience before we go. So next Monday, the 25th, we have Anne Seba with us. She's discussing her book about Esther Rosenberg. This is the first work about Esther and her husband published in some 40 years. Then our monthly collaboration with the Jewish Historical Society of England is back on Monday the 1st of November. We have Dr. Nicholas Evans speaking about forgotten cultural Jews. On the 8th of November, Leah Garrett joins us from New York to speak about her book, Ex-Troop, The Secret Jewish Commandos Who Helped Defeat the Nazis. And then the following week, Caroline Shenton is speaking about the evacuation of national treasures to Jewish country houses during the Second World War. And finally, for now, on the 22nd of November, we have autograph hunter Adam Andrusier chatting about his book titled Two Hitlers and a Marilyn. That should be one not to miss. All our events are free, but you can make a small donation on our website to help support our work and the cost of putting on these webinars if you wish to. We have speakers booked well into March of next year, so please go to the Milim site at milim.org.uk, sign up for our newsletter, and make sure you don't miss a thing going forward. It remains for me to thank our speaker, Vanessa Rosenthal, once again. Thank you so much, Vanessa.
No,
it's been a
my
pleasure to have you with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to seeing all of you at some future event. Until then, stay safe. See you soon.